Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the moves to rescue back some post-Brexit freedoms for young people. This is very much in line with the sort of policy I would hope Labour would like to adopt, and there's a report that the EU Commission has been asking member states what they think of it. But before we take a look at what this is, let's consider the situation that young people find themselves in. This is the Brexit referendum vote by age group. It's really very stark. 60% of over 65s voted to leave the EU, by 73% of 18 to 24-year-olds voting to remain. And because Brexit has disproportionately hit the freedoms of young people, this has always seemed particularly tragic. But the real picture is much worse. The very youngest of those 73% who voted to remain will now be almost 26 years of age. In fact, nobody in the current 18 to 24 age category got a say in the Brexit referendum. There are currently over 5.5 million people in that age group. Not one of them had a vote in 2016, but they're all dealing with the fallout. And this doesn't include those who are a little bit older but still couldn't quite vote in 2016. So when Brexiteers bang on about the 17.4 million, the reality is that millions of the people who voted 60% to leave have died. But the group who voted 73% to remain, the vast majority is still about. And their numbers have been boosted to the tune of many millions more. So although I will be arguing for the next Labour government to do all it can to reverse as many of the damage and impacts of Brexit as possible, I think we absolutely owe it to the younger generation to prioritise them. You know, they're living a present and facing a future that they never voted for. Earlier this year, the European Economic and Social Committee published an interesting report on youth engagement. Now, they're not just focusing on youth mobility for the UK, of course. In fact, a lot of the focus is on accession countries, but they are, on the issue of Brexit, they noted that young people had been particularly badly affected, and that the replacement for the Erasmus scheme, the Turing scheme, is weak by comparison. The report has raised the possibility of pursuing a reciprocal arrangement with the UK on youth mobility. Now, what such a scheme ends up looking like would, of course, be entirely down to what the EU wants, what the UK wants, and what they can both agree. The current UK government would have no interest, of course, because almost no young people vote for them. And is it really worth doing something that looks like it's a reversal of Brexit for no votes, but a load of aggro from their own tribe, right? But what if we could agree after the election a version of the old freedom of movement with, some caveats specifically for young people? The ability to at least study and work across the EU and the UK for this age group without the tedious red tape required to do that now. Because the important thing to point out here is this isn't something Labour are proposing. Whenever I talk about some aspect of, Labour would like to discuss this, Labour would like to get this agreement, and people usually come back with two types of response. The first is, this is cherry picking. And I can see how it looks like that, because it's, it affects just some people. But the distinction is the actual cherry picking, which was being discussed a lot before Brexit, was about the Tories trying to get the benefits they wanted without the downside. This isn't that. This is about mutual benefit. It literally is the basis for all agreements around the world. Second, people will say, the EU is not interested in deals with the UK. Now, this was always a vaguely balmy suggestion. The EU exists to do deals, specifically with European countries in the interest of harmonisation to make Europe peaceful through prosperity. This is the reason the entire project was begun long before I was born. And it is still the reason the project continues on today. But this is a report from the EU. It's an EU suggestion. And it's one that I see the EU Commission are raising with member states, so they're taking it seriously. They're asking the governments of EU members what they would think of a youth mobility deal with the UK and, what they'd be interested in it looking like. And there are multiple advantages to this youth mobility scheme that go beyond young people. I mean, the first is the obvious one. The British generation, which mostly has no fear of the EU and would as soon throw Nigel Farage into the sea as listen to him, would get a reversal of some Brexit damage, the likes of which the rest of us can only dream of. But there are wider benefits besides. A second is that the ideal sort of Brexit policy for Labour to work on with the EU is one that can be done quietly behind the scenes, not raise a lot of fuss. And this one, because it will only affect young people, and the Tories don't really care about young people, and nor do the mainstream media. I mean, I'm sure they'll be whining every time a Labour minister meets with the EU and does any sort of deal, but I'm not sure they'll generate that much motivation to complain about young people's policies. In fact, it's surely an easier policy than their own formal version, because Labour haven't mentioned plans for a youth mobility scheme. That's, as I say, that's not come from them. But they have said they'd like to agree a sort of easier movement for performers. Well, surely this scheme would be very similar for a different group of people. So I see no reason why Labour wouldn't jump at the chance after the election when they've got room to breathe. The third benefit is if we can agree a scheme whereby young people suddenly achieve greater freedoms again, maybe we can point to other people and go, wouldn't it be great if you had those freedoms as well? The sky didn't fall down when they got them. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have them? In fact, imagine the scenario whereby young people have some of these pre-Brexit freedoms returned. They get used to them for a year or two, and then some of them at the upper age limit are getting ready to have them taken away again. With each passing year, that's maybe, 1 million potential voters getting ready to lose some rights and freedoms. So first we can campaign to grant a small section of our society these freedoms. Then, once established, a campaign to promote the benefits, point out the problems that those coming to the end of the qualifying age face, and a way to discuss sensibly how freedom of movement is not actually responsible for many of the things that people were told. And those are the advantages to those of us on the pro-EU side of the debate in the UK. The EU group which produced this report highlights other advantages from their point of view. They say, and I quote, the potential to be a catalyst that could facilitate cooperation between the EU and the UK also in other areas. Just as I can see this as a vehicle towards getting more cooperation with the EU, they see the same. This statement was made as a way of selling their proposal to the EU Commission beyond the obvious aims. By selling the idea to the Commission and indeed the EU Council that it could be used as a way to work on cooperation with the UK in other areas as well, they're saying that the EU wants to work with the UK on agreements in other areas. So again, this concept of the EU are interested in discussing agreements with the UK is complete nonsense. I mean, I can quite believe they're sick of discussing things with Brexit cultists, that is about to come to an end, hopefully permanently, but at least for the next few years. Labour don't even have any Brexit cultists to send to Brussels. The Lexiteers are not exactly on speaking terms anymore. So I would love to push this policy for a number of reasons. First, it helps give something back to those who never wanted Brexit in the first place, and indeed had no say either way. Second, it's something that the EU are interested in, with the proposal actually coming from their side, not ours, so that makes it quite a fruitful line of discussion. Third, it would be an extraordinarily positive policy for Labour to pursue, which should attract relatively low levels of aggro from the swivel-eyed loons, and help shore up the youth vote, which they are already committed to expanding. I mean, come the following general election, we're not going to be talking about 18 to 24-year-olds, are we? It'll be 16 to 24-year-olds. And fourth, it allows us to identify tangible benefits of reversing aspects of Brexit to keep the momentum going against the entire concept of the worst policy decision any British government ever made. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.